Welcome to this edition of Valor Media. This is episode number 96 for December 6th, 2021. I'm your host, Mark Appenzeller, and I'm really glad that you're joining me today. This is part 2 of a conversation that I started 2 weeks ago in episode number 94, which I entitled Some Assembly Required. And in that episode, I talked about the predicament parents can find themselves in when their child has one gift they really, really want for Christmas, and it requires assembly. Maybe you've been there before. It ain't fun. Depending on the complexity of what needs to be assembled, particularly happening late at night on Christmas Eve, it can be a real stress inducer, but the parents do it because they love the child. Now, there's the larger question of the fixation itself. Kids invariably get that one thing that they're so convinced Christmas will be ruined without, and that's all they think about. If you never experienced it yourself, maybe you've seen the classic movie A Christmas Story with Ralphie and his pursuit of the Red Ryder BB gun. Every kid seems to do that. I certainly did. For us, it started with the Montgomery Ward Christmas catalog, which would usually come in the middle of September. And by the beginning of October, I had pored over those pages for hours and already decided what my list was of the 10 things I simply could not live without. Well, kids today see whatever those amazing gifts are in a digital format, on their phone, on the internet, maybe with an accompanying promo video, maybe with celebrity endorsements. And so the net result is they're bombarded with imagery, with sounds, with motion, and it drives the point that much deeper home. They get obsessed with it, they do the same things that we did, and they convince themselves that will make my Christmas complete. When assembly is required, they don't care. They're not seeing that. They didn't see mom and dad putting it together in the commercial. They saw the glorious finished product, and that's what they want. No questions asked. In the episode 2 weeks ago, I used that as an allegory to people who pursue either starting or developing a business. And it might seem like a stretch to do that, but there really is a lot of commonality between the two. Because just like the kid who gets so enmeshed in, I want that, we do that sometimes vocationally. We may have a really marvelous idea, an incredible concept, something that's absolutely worth pursuing, but we get wrapped up in the finished product and we fail to understand the steps that take us from point A to point Z. And it's heartbreaking, but I've seen that happen before, even in the settings of people who had an idea to create a new nonprofit. And they may have really had a great goal to serve other people, but they never really took the time to figure out what was required. And I talked about needing to take that finished product and disassemble it, just like you might disassemble that Christmas toy a year later. For me, it's really about understanding the nuts and bolts that are absolute essentials to get the framework in place to start you on the journey toward whatever that goal was. But that's really only half the battle. And so today's episode covers the other half of that. What do you do once you have a framework there? How do you keep the ball rolling once it starts? It may be a scientific principle that a body in motion tends to stay in motion, but that's not a business principle. Businesses don't automatically keep rolling. They take a lot of careful investment of our time, our energy, our effort, our scrutiny. We have to be self-analytical, and we have to be willing to really look at how things are happening. And if something needs corrected, small, large, or in between, we have to act quickly and strike while the iron is hot. So today's episode, Batteries Not Included, picks up where we left off 2 weeks ago. As any parent knows, the only thing worse than a Christmas toy that requires complex assembly is one that also requires batteries. Now today, in many facets, rechargeable batteries are the norm. Being able to have a lithium battery that you can hook up to a charger and replenish in an hour and a half is wonderful. We didn't have that when I was a kid. In the mid-1960s, there was a virtual explosion of battery-operated toys flooding the market, and when I was little, it seemed like everything took batteries. So it did put that extra layer of pressure on the parents. Not only did they have to assemble everything, but they had to address that battery issue. They had to make sure that they had the correct type of batteries for each toy. They had to make sure that they had the correct quantity. They had to make sure that they were fresh batteries, and ideally, they wanted to have several spare sets, because the worst thing that could happen to you as a kid was to open up your favorite toy on Christmas morning, put the batteries in it, play with it for 5 or 6 hours until they were bled dry, only then to discover that there were no spare batteries in the house. It was a different world back then. We didn't have the convenience of delivery to your door. There were a lot fewer retail options, so batteries were a big deal. Did you know that Americans purchase about 3 billion, that's with a B, dry cell batteries every year? 3 billion. And many of those do get purchased around Christmas. Without batteries, it doesn't matter if you have the greatest toy in the world. When the batteries aren't there, it won't work. It will never be what it's intended to be. Now, I think the same thing holds true from a business perspective. You can't really get going or keep going without batteries. So what are the batteries of our businesses or our organizations? Well, I think in a nutshell, it really comes down to the policies and the procedures that end up determining why we do what we do and how we do it. If we fail to grab hold of those basic concepts, we may have enough of a framework to get started and to do something for a while, but we'll never reach our true potential. We'll never really function the way we were designed to, and that can be the detriment that causes a business to simply fall by the wayside. It's difficult, especially if it's a startup. According to the U.S. Small Business Administration, in 2019, the failure rate for new business startups was around 90%. Now, that's doubly daunting because that can not only scare somebody out of trying to start a business, it can also freeze somebody in their tracks who already does have a business and is really at a point where they need to develop it. Knowing that a statistic like that exists can really scare somebody out of even trying. They may be simply content to have their business. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to risk upsetting things and pushing it into a southward direction. And so they try to maintain status quo. But you can't do that very long. It's like the kid on Christmas morning who keeps playing with the toy and playing with the toy. The batteries need to be replaced at some point. Replacing the batteries in your organization might mean finally documenting things that everybody just carried around in their heads. Maybe nobody ever really knew the specific way to do something, and it was kind of everybody's individual experience. Getting that down in a concrete, tangible form to ensure that everybody's doing something the same way can be a game changer. And if you're at a point where you've outgrown programs, where you're doing things the way you did last year, you should probably really start to explore ways to bring what you're all about to the people you serve in a more meaningful capacity. Just because it was right last year doesn't mean it's right this year. And back to the battery analogy, when I was a kid, sometimes you would have a toy and you would put batteries in it, play with it once or twice, and then put the toy up on the shelf and forget about it for 6 months. Later on, you would take the toy out only to discover that the battery acid had actually leaked out of the casing. Sometimes that would ruin the contact clips where the battery was seated. Sometimes it might even ruin the toy itself. I know in my parents' basement, there are some cardboard boxes that had toys in them from when I was a kid, and I still remember the one toy that had batteries that leaked, and to this day you can still see the stains of that battery acid on the cardboard. Well, that happens sometimes in our organizations. If we have stale batteries, something that worked for us 3 years ago, and we're not replenishing, we're not refreshing, it can be just like that battery acid. We technically have a policy. We technically have a way of doing things, but it's yesterday's way of doing things. And if the needs of the people we serve have changed, if our role as an organization has changed, and we don't find practical ways to change with it, the battery acid will leak out, will not only no longer be functioning, but will be destroying what it is that we're all about, because we're dealing with this thing that is so outdated and long past its shelf life. And sometimes if we cause people to try to fulfill their job functions with something that's either inadequate or outdated, that can lead to people becoming so frustrated that they decide to go elsewhere. And basically, I think unless it's a flaky pastry baked with apples, a turnover is never a good thing. But turnover can be a real problem for organizations that don't have fresh batteries. And when you have turnover, when people leave, whether they're paid staff or volunteers, that can create overwhelming upheaval. According to the website Go Remotely, businesses in the U.S. end up spending between 50 and 60% of an employee's salary to go through everything that's required to replace them. The advertising, the interviewing, the cross-training, the equipping, all the different components, just because somebody decided they wanted to go elsewhere. And even if you get somebody in to fill a vacated role, it can take 2 years for that replacement employee to end up reaching the same level of productivity as the person they were replacing. Having that deterioration, having that battery acid leak out in your organization has far-reaching ramifications. Maybe you got an organization together. Maybe you initiated a business startup. Maybe you bolted out of the gate going great guns. And now, 6 months down the road, you have no idea where to go next. It can be virtually impossible to decipher what it is you need to do when you're the one enmeshed in it. That's where an outside perspective can be the most incredible thing. Sometimes there are obvious and relatively easy changes to make, but you may never see them. Objectivity can be virtually impossible, especially when you're wrapped in the panic of trying to figure out what's going wrong. Does that describe you? In your organizational setting, are you either floundering in what you've been doing, or you're trying to branch out into something new and you don't know how to make the pieces fit? Valor can help. There is a division of Valor Ministries called Valor XL, and that's what we're all about. Bringing our knowledge base to you so that you can help to decipher these complex questions. Not only how do I get something going, but how do I keep it going? And if I need to make course corrections, what do I do? What are the things that I should establish as parameters to even give me wisdom as to what should or could be changed? We can work one-on-one with you to look at the specifics of your business, of whatever it is that you're doing vocationally, to find out what might be broken or where the missing pieces might be. Maybe you have the wrong batteries, or maybe you have last year's batteries. It's really about getting a fresh perspective and a refocus. You are the best expert for what's broken with your organization. Let us give you tools to help you on that trajectory toward repairing what's broken and building what needs to be developed so that you can do even more than you did before. If you'd like to learn more about how we can help you reach your business goals, contact us at info@valorxl.com, and someone from our team will get back in touch with you. One of the things we'd like to present to you is a document called Taking Your Organization's Temperature, where we can look at the climate of what you already have in place so that we can determine whether or not you move through your business ventures in a way that's inactive, reactive, or proactive. You can learn more about the services we provide by visiting us on Facebook at ValorXL or our website, www.valorxl.com. If you have suggestions for topics that would be beneficial for us to discuss on Valor Media, please contact us at media@thevalorcenter.org. And I encourage you to learn more about the overall mission of Valor Ministries on our website, www.thevalorcenter.org, and on Facebook at Valor Ministries. Please like and subscribe to this podcast. We publish new episodes each Monday. If the Valor Media podcast is beneficial to you, would you consider benefiting us by financially assisting us to bring you future episodes? If so, you can make your tax-deductible donations securely online by visiting us at www.thevalorcenter.org and clicking on the Donate button. Or you can send a check or money order to Valor Ministries, 324 East Antietam Street, Suite 104, Hagerstown, Maryland, 21740. Thank you so much for joining me for the 2 installments in this series. I hope it's been food for thought. If you're starting something new or developing what you already have, you really do need to have a good perspective. You need to make sure you don't overlook any of the nuts and bolts, and you need to make sure you have fresh batteries. Let us help you to become everything you want to be in your business or organization as you move into 2022. Thanks again for joining me today. Please come back next week when your host will be Lori Riston. And until then, remember this: you were made to thrive.